like to welcome you on this second panel on the International Day within the German Senior Citizens Day, one day dedicated to international and German seniors policy. This is something novel, but it reveals that it is really important for national, European and international development, which is supporting us and has quite an impact on political will. This is why I'm delighted to announce Joanna Goodey, who will reveal the new findings of the European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights. Then there will be a panel discussion with participants from different European countries. Professor Dr. Hörl from Austria, Sarah Lennon from Ireland, Maria Petkova from Bulgaria, Anna Chabiera from Poland, and Maciej Kucharczyk from the Age Platform Europe will also come up with a European perspective. I would like to wish you a good discussion, good presentations and new ideas. And as in the first panel, the chat will be available for questions on the speakers that will be addressed in the follow-up discussion. Now it's Joanna Goodey who will take the floor with insights on research and findings of the European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights. The floor is yours, Joanna.
Thank you so much, and thank you very much to the organisers for the invitation to speak here today. And I've been given the task of introducing the framing of this panel on strengthening human rights in old age. What I'm going to do is share my screen with a PowerPoint. So if people could let me know if they could actually see it okay. So thank you very much. Basically, what I'm going to be talking about in relation to this session, strengthening human rights in old age, but how, is talking about how in the context of the European Union, we've actually moved on to talking about human rights with respect to not only persons' needs, but rights. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you very much. So if you move on to the next slide, please. What we see here is kind of a shifting approach in the context of the European Union. So we've been moving from understanding rights in terms of deficits that create needs to encompassing a rights-based approach. And that means respecting the fundamental right to equal treatment of everybody, regardless of age. But at the same time, we need to recognize those who need specific protection and care. A rights-based approach, why is it meaningful? Because it can better meet needs, but it can only do that if you have a legal basis that's enforced in practice. And for that, you need the possibility of legal redress, because there's no point in having laws if they aren't actually implemented in practice. Next slide, please. I can hear somebody else speaking in the background. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. In the context of the European Union, what you see on here, this slide here, is that we do have provisions in law that recognise age, and particularly age in relation to discrimination. That goes back to the Treaty of Amsterdam in 1997. But what is often not talked about in the context of the European Union is that we have our own Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union, which applies to all member states when they apply European Union law. And just here, you see reference to different articles in the Charter that speak to ensuring the rights of older persons. You have Article 21, which is very important in relation to non-discrimination on different grounds. So it includes age and other grounds, such as ethnicity, such as one's gender, and a whole range of other grounds, but I won't go into the detail there. You have a standalone article as well, Article 25, the rights of the elderly, which basically says the Union recognises and respects the rights of the elderly to lead a life of dignity and independence and to participate in social and cultural life. It's quite unique there in having that standalone article. Importantly, you have a specific area of what we call secondary EU law, the Employment Equality Directive, which covers equal treatment in employment and occupation and direct and indirect discrimination, and it encompasses age. Then you have all areas of so-called soft law. You have the green paper on aging that was mentioned, but it's not rights focused, this green paper. And you have also the European Pillar of Social Rights. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So what you see here in this figure, and I'll explain it quite simply, is if you have on the very left-hand vertical side, you have all the different grounds that are covered by EU law in terms of non-discrimination. Age is one of them. But then you look horizontally where it's yellow, you see that age, excuse me, somebody's hovering the arrow over the slide. Thank you. You can see with age, you have no EU level protection when it comes to age in the area of education, goods and services, and social protection. EU law currently only protects people from non-discrimination in secondary EU law in the area of employment. So there are massive gaps for protecting persons in regard to their age. Next slide, please. What you'll see in this next slide is that contrary to EU law, there are equality bodies in member states that cover more areas in terms of social protection and non-discrimination than are currently covered under established EU law. So EU member states have equality bodies which go beyond the current coverage of what we have in EU law. So it's saying that certain member states have recognized the need to look after age and non-discrimination beyond the grounds simply of employment. And this is showing the number of member states of the European Union, of which there are 27, that cover age in different areas. Next slide, please. So if we move on to the next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. What you will see there is a basic framework that the Fundamental Rights Agency uses. And this was modeled on a framework of the UN Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights. And this framework explains how you can make rights apply in practice. So it's from rights on paper to rights in practice. On the very left, you see structure, and that means what legal institutions have in place, the law that they have in place, process, the efforts that states make to actually put the money and the policy behind implementing law. So it's effectiveness of applying the law in practice. And then importantly, you have outcome indicators, which look at the actual situation on the ground for rights holders, their actual experiences in practice, because law is no good unless you can measure how people experience rights in practice. Next slide, please. So I'm now going to be talking about France research, which encompasses older age. Next slide, please. So you'll see on the next slide, the mandate of the Fundamental Rights Agency is to look at the situation in the EU with respect to fundamental rights. We do this through mapping law and policy. That's the indicators I talked about, the actual structural indicators. But then we go on to looking at the situation on the ground, the so-called outcome indicators. We do this through large-scale surveys, through qualitative research, and we adopt legal opinions. To date, FRA's mainstay of its work encompassing age is through its surveys. We've had a specific chapter dedicated to older persons in our Fundamental Rights Report, and we've had a series of COVID bulletins which have focused on the rights of older persons in the context of the EU. And we've got our first dedicated research on older persons, which I'll be referring to shortly. Next slide, please. Next slide. What this slide shows is the examples of FRA's survey research, where we encompass people aged 16 plus. In most of our surveys, we have no upper age limits. And here you see in red the number of respondents we have for each survey. So it's a rich data source that people can use in the EU to look at people's experiences, also in relation to age and older age. Next slide, please. I'm going to show you now some examples of results from our fundamental rights survey. If you stay with this slide, please. This survey, we did it in 2020. It covers nearly 35,000 respondents. It covers all member states, and importantly, persons aged 16 and above were included. I'm going to give you some examples from this research. Next slide, please. So what you'll see in this slide, we asked people a series of statements, and the statement we asked them was, everyone in this country enjoys the same basic human rights. And what you see in this slide is that there's general agreement across all EU member states. This is the EU average, that everybody in their particular country where they were asked the questions thinks they enjoy the same basic human rights. We don't see variance amongst age. But one thing to note here is for those people whose activities are severely limited because of a disability or a severe health problem, they tend to agree with this statement less rather. So it's the case that persons who are severely limited in their activities tend to agree with this statement more. And of course, this impacts on some older persons who experience limitations in their daily activities. Next slide, please. So what you'll see on the next slide is in relation to responses to the statement that mainstream parties and politicians don't care about people like me. Now, the results for the EU average amongst the older age groups is that more older persons, 65 plus, are saying that they agree with the statement that mainstream parties and politicians don't care about people like me. They agree with the statement also if they are severely limited in their daily activities. So we have evidence here that for the EU average, there is a problem. There are great differences between member states, which I won't go into, but this is showing the EU average. Next slide, please. So the next slide is responses to the statement. Next slide, please. Thank you. This slide is responses to the statement, public administration makes information easy to find online. Far fewer older persons agree with this statement. Now, why is this important to note? It's important to note because in the context of the European Union, increasingly public administration, public services are going online. And this is a particular issue in the context of the European Union. Next slide, please. So what you will see in the next slide, and this is a slide that refers to non-internet users that we surveyed. And we asked them about perceived obstacles for using the internet by age. And what you see amongst the older age groups, so 75 plus, is a lack of skills. So this lack of skills increases with age. People are saying the lack of skills prevents them from using the internet. Also, can you go back to the previous slide, please? Could you go back 2 slides, please? Thank you. If you stay with this slide. In terms of no interest in using the internet, you see that the response there is lower amongst certain age groups than others. So we need to unpack these results and see about accessibility for older persons using the internet. Next slide, please. So this slide shows, in terms of internet users, something that we're quite familiar with is that internet users are much lower amongst the older age groups. So I want you to remain with that finding there, and I'll quickly finish with a couple of examples of where FRA is taking this kind of evidence from our large-scale surveys that we can break down by age to say if we're talking about people's access to their rights as they get older, and given that more public and indeed private services are going online, what do we need to do? Here I'm focusing specifically on access to public services as a right. So next slide, please. So if you stay with this slide, with respect to aging in digital societies from a rights perspective, there are council conclusions, and this was under the German presidency of the Council of the EU, and the conclusions referred to human rights, participation and well-being of older persons in the era of digitalization. Because if we're talking about active aging or people engaging with people, there are also both opportunities and challenges for older persons when they have to use the internet. It's not only a negative, it's a positive in allowing people to access goods and services and be in touch with people. But they need to have the opportunities, the skill set, and the training, if you like, to be able to use the internet. FRA is conducting new research on aging in digital societies, where we're looking at online and offline public services. We're also recognizing intersectionality. What do I mean by that? I mean older persons also with respect to differences in terms of gender, in terms of disability, in terms of ethnicity, in terms of all different socioeconomic indicators, because we have to understand the diversity of older persons' experiences, not only between member states, but between people within member states, about why it is that they cannot access certain goods and services that the state should make available to them if they're increasingly going online. And importantly, part of our research is directly going to be with rights holders. We will engage with focus groups, with older persons to get their standpoint and their experiences embedded in the research. That goes back to what I said earlier, that it's no good having laws on paper. It's no good having just policy on paper. You need to speak to the rights holders to understand their experiences in practice. So my last slide, if you could move on, thank you. So I would just point you to one publication of the Fundamental Rights Agency, and that was an opinion we produced on the equality directives 20 years after they came into being. And this refers to gaps in what current equality and non-discrimination law covers in the EU with regard to age and other grounds. So whilst we've heard from many other countries around the world where the situation for older persons is worse than in the EU, one can say there are still significant gaps in the European Union for protecting older persons with respect to non-discrimination and equality. The law is very limited in this area. So this last statement I want to finish with here is that we say at FRA, and we've heard this with other speakers, that fundamental rights do not carry an expiry date. We need good evidence to see what the situation on the ground is. We need the laws in place to make people's rights enforceable in practice, and we need redress so that older persons can actually make a complaint to equality bodies or ombudspersons if their rights are not enforced in practice. Thank you very much. The last slide shows my email address. If you move to that, should people have questions. Thank you, and thank you very much for your patience with the slides, and thank you for the person for helping me with that because my screen froze. Thank you a lot.
Well, thank you very much, Joanna, for this insight of your research, and where we really have blind spots within EU law. I think many people are not aware. We always think, well, our fundamental charter protects us. It's there, but often we're not aware that it's only applicable on EU law, and most national constitutions do not have age as a ground of discrimination in their constitutions, while many have gender, disability, and other grounds, or ethnicity, religion, belief, but not age. So maybe this is something where we also have to look at our national laws and maybe get more secondary EU law in the right areas. But secondary EU law is always also limited to the competences of the European Union. We have to bear that in mind. So I'd like now to move on to our speakers from the various EU countries who will give us insight and also will give us good practice examples and examples to learn from and maybe implement also in Germany in the future to come. I mean, you can always get better. And Jetzt wechsle ich ins Deutsche. Unser erster Gast
So
ist
our first presenter is Professor Josef Hörl from Austria, and he'll talk about a helpline in Austria. And I'm very pleased to be able to welcome him here virtually. It's a pity that we cannot meet in Hanover in person, but we're doing the best out of it. Yes, hello from Vienna. I hope you can hear me well. My name is Josef Hörl. I'll try to speak about some aspects from the Austrian perspective. Now, I'm sure that it's similar to other European countries, and I'll also be talking about the helpline. I want to talk not only about negative aspects, but also about the positive ones. First of all, I'd like to comment on something that Joanna Goodey said on discrimination in old age. In Austria, this is prohibited, similar as it's the case in other countries, but that is only at the workplace. It's not valid when it comes to goods and services, for example. Just to give you an example, a 70-year-old who would like to go to a nightclub, then they can decide not to let him in, saying that this is only for young people. So if that 70-year-old person would then contact the Equality Commission, then they would say, you know, there's nothing we can do. It's their right to do that. Now, this is not a typical case that happens all the time, but it shows clearly that you can be discriminated against outside the workplace. And we know that when it comes to insurance, to rental cars, that there is discrimination against older persons. Another example from Austria is this, and this is different in other countries. The political representation of older persons. The oldest person in the Austrian parliament is 68 years old. So there are no parliamentarians who are older. That means that about 25% of the Austrian population is not being represented in the Austrian parliament. So those between 20 and 30 years old have much more representation. And in other countries, there are 70 and 80 years old parliamentarians, but that's not the case in Austria. Now, what about another case of discrimination? We have good consumers protection. And for the Senior Citizens Council Federation in Austria, there is a class action, and whenever there is a class action, the Senior Citizens Council can take the lead on that. Now, what's typical for Austria is that there is a strict separation between social aid, care, and health care. The health insurance only pays if you will get better, but if you are chronically in need of care, then you need to pay for it on your own or get social subsidies. So you cannot use your health insurance for that. Now, that means that geriatric care is not being respected the way it should be within healthcare. Now, we're seeing that the remobilization of older persons is progressing quite a lot lately. Now, what about privacy, the right to privacy, to live in your own home? This is being well protected. Now, what happens if this right is being violated? So if a person feels that this right is being violated, there is the only possibility to claim your rights on your own. Now, when it comes to institutions, in nursing homes, for example, privacy is a delicate issue. So when it comes to personal care or knocking on the door, things that should be given many times are being forgotten. And smoking, it's not good for your health. We all know that. But to prohibit smoking as it's being done in nursing homes, well, that is a breach of the protection of your privacy. When it comes to the right of free movement and the right to protection and safety and security, especially in nursing homes, you can see tension here because residents, for health reasons or due to cognitive limitations, sometimes cannot or should not be leaving the residence. And there is a law that stipulates under which circumstances you can make someone stay within the residence or nursing home using medication. Now, this is a very delicate issue that can lead to abuse. And that is why there are different legal instruments for those cases. We have a mechanism, the OPCAT. Now, the Austrian authorities carry out controls in accordance with the UN Convention on the Prohibition of Torture and on the protection of persons with disabilities. However, those working in a nursing home react in very sensible ways when you say that something may be a case of torture. Now, what about the unknown cases? There are many of those because there are no controls that can make sure that the right to privacy is not being violated. And this is part of the regular criminal code. Now, as we say, if there is no plaintiff, then there is no judge. So let's say that a family member leaves the key somewhere so that the caretaker can use it, but closes the door with the key, locks the door with the key, and that would be then a violation of the right to free movement of the older person. Now, there are many examples for cases like that one, and it's important to get to know these cases. Many times it's not the victims themselves speaking about those cases, but rather witnesses or even doctors who know about that. And that is why a violence helpline can be of great advantage. On the one hand, you can listen to someone describing a case and then making sure that the right measures are being taken. Now, if you talk to older persons, then we've noted that it's not a good idea to directly ask about a case of violence or restrictions of free movement, but rather have a typical chat with that person to then find out whether they may be a victim of violence, especially when we talk about domestic violence. Now, in conclusion, we can say that the main question always is this: what's the public opinion on older persons? We've seen that in the Eurobarometer surveys. There is not a negative perspective on older persons per se, but there is ageism. It still exists. So degrading comments or reports in the newspapers, you'll find those. And that's different compared to sexism or racism. That's not being tolerated anymore, but ageism is still being tolerated. And we're talking about a population becoming too old. Now, who says how old a population may be? So think about that logically. If life expectancy goes up, and that's something we all want, then of course a population is going to age. And we know that there is limited space on that planet. Now, letters from readers can help raise awareness in the press and media. Thank you. Thank you very much for those insights from Austria. And I think that we should deepen our bilateral relationship again. Now, could we say that we speak the same language? More or less, I think we do. So thank you very much for your contribution. We'll now go to Ireland, and I would like to welcome Sarah Lennon, Director of Sage Advocacy, and she'll talk about the role of independent advocacy in protecting the human rights of vulnerable older people. Sarah has a lot of experience in this field. The floor is yours.
Hopefully we can see my slides now. Hello from Ireland, Diagwich, as we say in Ireland. I'm very glad to be here today. I wish it was a person, but this is the next best thing, I think. I'm going to talk about, I suppose, from Sage Advocacy's point of view, our practical role and what we do in Ireland to support older people and other vulnerable people as well. So just a little bit about who Sage Advocacy is. So we're an independent organisation. We operate across Ireland, the 26 counties in the Republic of Ireland. We provide information, support and advocacy for older people, adults who may be vulnerable, whether they're in the community, whether they're in long-term care, such as nursing home care, or whether they're healthcare patients in our hospital system. And our work involves us trying to promote the social inclusion and the equality of the people we represent and work with, and also social justice. So just a quick slide about the quality standards of our work. So these are the standards or the principles through which we do our work. They involve respect, social justice, competence, compassion, accessibility, independence, and accountability. So a quick slide around what advocacy issues Sage dealt with in 2020. By far, the biggest issue was the desire to move residents. So that might have involved people, older people who were in hospital, who wanted to go home, and people who were in their own home, who for whatever reason were moving to supported living or to nursing home care. And the second biggest issue was issues around finance, often very closely linked to moving to nursing homes, for example, your personal finances. Issues around access to community services. And then the fourth biggest issue was around supporting decision-making. In Ireland, we still operate under a 19th century system called the ward of court system, which makes people ward of the court. We don't yet have a formal guardianship or supported decision-making system, although we do anticipate that changing in 2022. And again, in terms, that's our advocacy cases, but just in terms of calls to Sage Advocacy for support, very common themes again, issues around residential care, accessing community services, financial issues, and barriers then to making supported decision-making are the headline issues that come into Sage Advocacy over the phone as well. So how Sage Advocacy does its work is through a referral pathway. So typically speaking, somebody will call us first of all. If we're able to give them information over the phone and advice, they can often go away and support themselves. But where somebody needs more intensive support, we have what's called a referral pathway. So somebody will call into Sage Advocacy, and typically within 1 hour, there'll be a call back to establish what the issues are and if it's a case for Sage. We would then log our call into our case management system and then pass it on to one of our regional coordinators. So we have regional coordinators or advocates on the ground in every corner of Ireland. That regional coordinator would then gather information, arrange to meet the person, and if the person wants support, they'll sign a referral form and we'll begin casework with their consent. So we support the person all the way then until the issue is resolved. Hopefully, and if the issue is not resolved, but it is closed in some other way or it cannot be resolved, then the advocacy support would cease at that point. So we're very issue specific. We would support people with issues as distinct from offering long-term support. It's focused very much on the issue that the person has identified they need support with. Just a quick slide around who makes contact with Sage. Primarily, it has been nursing homes throughout our existence, but that's beginning to change now for the better, and more clients themselves or individuals are contacting us, which is very, very positive for Sage Advocacy. It shows that we're reaching the populations we want to reach. It's still a lot of nursing homes who will make contact with us, and social workers, family, and then hospitals as well would be the primary ways people would make contact with Sage. So just a quick run through about some of the advocacy issues that come into Sage Advocacy. What we would see is primarily because of our legal system in Ireland, we would see people who have been described as lacking capacity instead of necessarily needing support around a particular issue. and that's quite a common one. We would see a reasonable amount of coercive control, so where there's family member or family members putting pressure on an older person to make decisions or to not engage with services, for example. We would see issues around consenting for treatment, medical treatment, or what's called the nursing home support scheme. So that's our scheme that's in place in Ireland for a co-payment for people who go into nursing homes. The resident is expected to make a partial payment either now or after they've died through their estate. We saw a lot of issues around the consent for the COVID-19 vaccine, and family members becoming very involved in whether they could or could not consent and calling themselves next of kin. We saw family members who didn't want their family member to be vaccinated, seeking to influence the decision as well. We've seen people opposing hospital discharges, so not resisting their family member coming home from hospital. We've seen family occupying an older person's property when they've gone into hospital, for example, for a short stay. On some occasions, even changing the locks and not allowing the older person to return home to their own home. Family conflict is a common theme in a lot of our work. We've also seen family maybe collecting the pension or social welfare allowances on behalf of the older person and maybe not appropriately using it. A lack of oversight on what are called agency arrangements. So in Ireland, if you are not able to manage your own social welfare payments, you can appoint somebody to do that, but there's not great oversight over how that money is used. We've seen issues around people under the age of 55 in nursing homes in Ireland because of the type of support that they need. And we do see a small amount of abuse, so sexual abuse, financial abuse, physical abuse, and neglect. One of the other things that SAGE provides support with is patient advocacy. So some of the patient advocacy issues that we would support people with, and these will be people who are involved in our hospitals receiving treatment, or maybe might be their own personal doctor or their general practitioner. So some of the issues that come up there cover GP issues, so your general practitioner, your community doctor, being able to access appropriate care or services. The big one is poor communication between medical professionals and patients, issues around maternity care, pediatric care, issues around pre and post surgery, and poor outcomes for medical procedures, medication errors, and a significant one will be a delay in diagnosis. Just want to flag a few of these documents that we produced in the last 12 months. They're available on the SAGE Advocacy website. So we produced a document in 2020, at the end of 2020, and it's still very relevant. It's called Choice Matters. So it was the perspective of SAGE Advocacy advocates during the first part of the COVID-19 crisis in Ireland, and how I suppose a lot of things happened in Ireland, particularly around older people in hospitals were maybe moved either to the community or to nursing home care, and some of the perspectives about some of the good things that happened during the early part of COVID-19. And obviously some of the more difficult or not so good things that happened in Ireland. We've also got a couple of other more recent documents, best practice in supporting adults who may be vulnerable to manage their own finances. So money, finances, pension, social welfare, all very big issues when it comes to supporting older people and respecting their rights. And obviously then there's another document there from 2020 as well, delivering quality medical care in Irish nursing homes. So there's just a document there from earlier in the year. We're currently working on a document around access to justice in Ireland for older people and people who may be vulnerable, particularly in relation to the issue I spoke about earlier around our system of adult guardianship in Ireland, which involves the person being made a ward of court. So just to finish on this slide, that's our website, www.sageadvocacy.ie. You can see all of those publications and lots more information besides. There's our Facebook page, our Twitter page, and our LinkedIn page. Please do get in touch. And if I can answer any questions or provide any further information, I will be delighted to do so. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for giving us this wonderful insight. Ich glaube, eine solche zentrale
I do believe that we don't have such a central agency in Germany. At least I'm not aware of it. So you're active in a very precious area and also covering the 26 counties in Ireland. And I think this is a particularity in a decentralized country. We in Germany have a federal system, as you do, and in the big cities it may be easier. But of course you need to cover rural areas as well, where we partly have a high level of elderly people living. Thank you very much. And we're traveling within Europe now to the southeast, to Bulgaria, and I'm delighted to listen to Maria Petkova from TULIP. She works for the family group conferencing. She has developed this as a tool in order to support elderly.
Hello, shall I share my screen now?
Yes, please do so.
Okay. Do you see it?
Yes, we can see it.
So
now it's lost
read
again.
again.
Yeah, there it is.
Let me start with thanking the organizers and now the participating colleagues for this really useful opportunity to share thoughts and also to share experiences. I clearly recognized many of the things that the other colleagues have mentioned earlier. I represent an organization called TULIP Foundation, and it's an organization that is not just about family group conferencing. We do a lot of other things as well. But because today we're talking about human rights in old age, and it's about human rights and rights of older people, I'm not sure if I'm able to move the slides. Yes. I wanted to start by saying that, when we speak about human rights of older people, we speak of people on the first place, and then comes older, and human rights are for humans. And this is a quote from David Bowie, and he passed a couple of years ago, but that's what he said in the last year of his life. Aging is an extraordinary process where you become the person you should always have been. And I thought, this is very positive, this is very nice, this is exactly how it is. And thinking about the conference today and a few days ago, I remembered when I really got involved in projects and thinking and policies related with older people. I was in my late 30s. And over all these years, now I'm in my mid-60s. And all those years, obviously, have been extremely privileged, but I have never felt a border in between people from different ages. So I thought this is normal, this is a very natural thing. And the more older I became, the more I realized that it has not quite natural, and for many people, it is difficult. And those of us who have aged, we know that, we have witnessed that the world has changed. From the first documents on human rights in 1848, there have been numerous documents, conventions, studies, policies, plenty of talks and conferences and workshops and trainings and you name it on the issue of human rights, and especially over the last years, the rights of older people. But even if you go back to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, as I did the other day, I was really surprised to see that rights of older people, discrimination or different treatment on the basis of age is not present in this declaration at all. Age is not mentioned. So I thought, how come? And I spoke with a friend of mine, he has been a lawyer for like 50 years, I guess. And I said, how come that there's nothing about age? And he said, let me think about it. And we had a long conversation, and at the end he said, maybe, 80 years ago, people didn't think that there might even be a different treatment on the basis of age, because in a post-war Europe, people take for granted that age is associated with experience and knowledge, and so people just valued age. But the world continued to change, especially over the last 10, 20 years. Things have really changed. We now live in a global village. We have, relatives, family members, children, parents, friends, who live not just in the same household or maybe town, they even live in a different continent. And that brings us to digital. And, we all know that for the last year and a half, we had to move to digital reality to just be able to meet other people. But even in the digital world, some are natives. I mean, our grandchildren, young people that are masters in it. While we just heard shortly ago that a lot of people over the age of 50 or 60, not to talk about those over 70, have difficulties to be fully participating in social life and communication through digital platforms. And also what is different for the last years is that currently we have 2, even 3 generations of older people living together in our countries. This is a new thing. And I talk about things that have changed, but we also know that certain things never change. Older people are not homogeneous group. I mean, they're different, by many, characteristics. And being different or not, they still contribute enormously to their families, to their children, to their communities, to the national economies, and also the European economy. And yes, what is, someone raised this question. When exactly do you become an older person? When exactly do you really stop being important or valuable or reflected in policies? Maybe this is when you stop going to work. But even people, who get retired, they don't stop contributing. I mean, they're still there. And yes, older people, as all other humans, need attention, support, care, more care, but they have the experience, they have the knowledge, and they're happy to share this. And that is about the context in which we were thinking over the last 10 years, what could be done for older people and for a growing generation and growing number of older people in the country, so that we don't only rely on legislation and on government, but also try to involve older people themselves. I will reach this, it's a very basic definition that is valid for any person anywhere around the world. To live well as humans, we need to be part of the community, to be accepted in this community, in which we receive support when it's needed, but in which we also are able to contribute, because that is what makes us valuable, important member of a community. It could be a very small community, a family, and it could be a huge community of friends and colleagues. And what is also important for humans is to participate in social life. And of course, we speak about supporting people and living with dignity from very early to very old age. And the rights of people in old age are not just important for people in old age. Let's stress this, they're important for everyone. Because as we live together, as we share things, we have come to this understanding together with older people in different groups that we work with across the country, the very concept of rights is not just a document that is written, accepted, voted, put in a shelf. The concept of rights, should be in the practice, in our daily life experience. And we know that in jurisdictions, there are lawyers and there are advocates, who help people who need some help, with legal issues, with social issues, with administrative issues. And we also know that older people sometimes need some support in some of their daily life. This is in a famous picture of the cultural iceberg, and most of us, when we meet someone or we know someone, for a short time, we see the language, the dress, the color of the hair, we see some things, but we don't see other much more important elements that are below water. And we thought that the best way to give access to their rights for older people would be by engaging the circle of the closest people that they have in their lives. And this could be friends, families, neighbors. And these are the people who know each other best. I mean, they could easily recognize any of the elements that you see in the ocean, under the water. And we also know that people are the only true guarantee for human rights of other people, because the very concept of human rights is made by people. And there was the same friend of mine, a lawyer, who told me the other day in this long discussion that we had about human rights of older people, and he said, what you do is actually, in our field, is much more difficult, because there are also laws of physics, but these are easy. People don't need to know the laws of physics, because when they jump, the gravitation takes them back to Earth. But you don't always know, and you shouldn't know about physics. You shouldn't study physics. To be very familiar with things like water going down and the leaves falling in the season. But when it comes to juridical material, when it comes to laws, it makes it much more complicated for all of us together to present this to other people and to engage other people. And we came to this model for decision making. We actually came up with a concept, not because it's a concept for older people. That is a model that we started using for children and families, a few years ago. And then what we saw is that grandmothers and grandparents and people over the age of 50, 60, 70 are taking part in this organized meeting of the family, and then not just taking part, but they're contributing enormously. And let me tell you, just in one sentence, what a family group conference is. It is a practical instrument for solving a problem, and if it finding a solution to a concrete problem, and it works like it is, of course, organized meeting of children and parents and members of the extended family or important people for the family or friends or neighbors or colleagues, and it's pre-organized, and they come together and they make a plan. Their plan to solve the problem of one of them. And we started, we tried a few times, and then we see so that it actually works quite nicely for older people as well. What decision making is, and it's closely linked with rights and understanding your rights and being aware of the rights of other people and finding the balance in between my rights and the rights of other people and being able to defend those rights. When you have the balance, decision making is about defining an issue or problem or conflict, someone that has to be dealt with. It's about expression of your opinion or your position, but it's also about listening and respecting the position and opinion of others. It's about suggesting different ideas, different options, ways to solve a problem. Decision making is also about sharing our professional or life experience. It's about making sure that everyone has spoken and everyone has shared concerns, suggestions, ideas, whatever they want or they have to say. And decision making is also about taking responsibility and being part of the implementation of plan that is being done. And what is important of using this type of decision-making model in supporting older people to have their rights executed? The two main aspects. On one side, this model could be used when an older person needs support, or there is a change, or there is an issue with social inclusion, or maybe health, or maybe administrative, or maybe pension. It could be anything. And in this case, what we see in practice is that the best defenders of the rights of someone are the people that are close to him. On one side. On another side, people, and especially older people, sometimes feel not very self-confident, not very brave to share their problems, because they have seen reactions against people who have problems. So sometimes they feel ashamed. And the more friendly, the more known the meeting and the people around you are, the more you're able to speak freely about what the problem really is. And the more freely you can express what you really want or what you really are able to fight for. That's one side. But there's also another side. And as I mentioned earlier, what is happening? We have intergenerational exchange, I think. But as I mentioned earlier, we actually decided to try this model for older people when we saw year after year that when there is a family group conference, for child or maybe young people, there are many people from the family circle and then friends and colleagues who come, and they're in their 50s, 60s, 80s. And we saw two things. One is the suggestions they have, the life experience, the advices they give, the contribution is fantastic. And it's highly recognized by children, young people, and parents. And there's the other thing, these people, even in their really late 80s, they come up not just with their expertise, but they come up with practical support. And they feel confident, and they feel valuable, and they feel important, and they feel part of the community. But when you do it once or twice, your self-confidence is completely different. And then, you start to speak for yourself. And as I said earlier, human rights are for all. And last thing, I was really thinking these days, when we talk about generations, a few generations of older people across Europe, these are the cohorts that have come up with all the documents and all the concepts for human rights. These are the people who drafted the documents, who worked on the documents, who fought for the rights of children, for the rights of people with disability, the rights of women. And if we have in the 21st year of the 21st century, if we have so many documents and regulations for protecting the rights of human beings, and especially in Europe, this is because of the hard work of those generations. So as people, we could not leave the older people, defending their rights by themselves alone. At the same time, as older people, we could not stay alone in this. Now we should make anything possible to have the other generations with us together in this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria.
From Bulgaria, we're traveling to Poland, to the north, to Chabiera, working on the agency of the European Commission for Human Rights. And in Poland, there is an interesting institution available with an ombudsperson and arbitrage for the elderly. Anna is working in this area and will give us an insight into this area. Europe is also here to learn from each other and how we can improve our situation. Anna, welcome to you. Unfortunately, we can't meet physically in Hanover, but still a warm-hearted welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I really wish I could meet you in person there, but the circumstances are fully understandable. So thank you for inviting me, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk to you about this added value of National Human Rights Institution, which is an ombudsman office in Poland, and in Germany. That's just to give you the possibility to imagine, is this German Institute for Human Rights, which is playing similar role in Germany. Although ombudsman, of course, can receive complaints and then work with them. So to hear from the ground what people are complaining about. And as independent equality body, which is in Germany, Antidiskriminierungsstelle, as far as I know the name in German, we have also the mandate to conduct independent research on discrimination, including discrimination based on age. We are also having this mandate on national preventive mechanism, which means my colleagues frequently visit the places of detention like prisons, but also care facilities. And it was very important also during the pandemic. But coming back to this added value and hearing, and thank you again for all excellent presentations we've heard so far. I wanted to start with sharing a link. Yes, I'm back here, and now I'm sharing the link here. It is our joint initiative, and Baxo was also involved in Age Platform Europe as well. As we've heard in the first part of today's conversations, the Convention of the Rights of Older Persons is much needed. So this is an example of our advocacy work. So we invite all NGOs and universities, but also bodies of other types to join us as signatories of the open letter, who calls the open-ended working group on aging, which is the platform on UN level when we discuss the rights of older persons, to urge the member states to start drafting the new convention. Also, we included also some particular tasks for them, but please have a look there and try to convince your organizations and to sign in, and please spread the word about it around your networks. And I think this is the role of NHRIs, this is so National Human Rights Institutions, to bring together different stakeholders who care on the implementation and of the rights of older persons to be heard at the global level. So this example shows us also how national human rights institutions work. we contribute to the work of open-ended working group on aging by showing the examples and the state of play on in our countries on our national level, because we do the research and we do have the complaints. But then we also learn from the outcome of the discussion what we really still lack in our countries. And then we can focus how to convince our government to introduce necessary changes. And this is one of our tasks as included in the mandate, that we provide recommendations to our government. And we focus, of course, on the when we talk about the rights of older persons, we try to combine the discussion on UN level to the discussion on national level. So when at UN level we discuss the right to education, then we provide our analysis to government showing that older persons actually remains invisible in national policies as rights holders regarding education or protection against violence and neglect and abuse. So there are different topics, different areas when we try to raise awareness, but the leitmotif of our contributions, and what was very, very clearly shown by Joanna Goodey in her presentation, is the shift from social-based rights approach to human rights-based approach. And this is not only something which we need to introduce in the national policies and law, but it's the huge I would say shift needed in the general perception of the older persons as human rights holders in our society. And of course law and public policies would help us to do it, but we observe that the work it's needed to be done, it's huge. I would also just mention here what is also the role of, just as an example of what I said before, that we also conduct research on discrimination. But the research might show us also the state of situation of the group vulnerable to discrimination. So we are just about finishing research representative for older persons 60 plus in Poland about the situation during pandemic. And I hope we'll be able to translate the main results into English and to share with wider community. But I think one result I will share with you, which is not very surprising, but the more people declared within the survey that they feel lonely, the less they were able to reach out for external support or state support. And I think this is a really huge challenge regarding also implementation of human rights, to assure it to the person who are in this regard most vulnerable among all the persons, because they feel who they feel also at the same time lonely. And I think these challenges are common in different countries, so therefore they need to be tackled not only in one country but in more countries. Just to stress at the end of this part of my presentation, that again, that the shift to stress this human rights-based approach is mostly needed, and we work together with other stakeholders to make it more understandable, both in the words literally, we translate it into Polish, but also we translate the situation of older persons into the language of human rights. So if you have in your country national human rights institution, please approach them, ask them to join our letter open letter and to be also part of this movement to achieve this Convention of the Rights of Older Persons. I stop here, but I hope I will be back after the second question. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Anna. Vielen, vielen Dank nach Warschau.
Many thanks to Anna. Now, from Warsaw, we come back to the core of Europe with Maciej Kucharczyk of the Age Platform Europe. He's the Secretary General, and he'll talk about the European perspective. Anna has already mentioned the influence of the European Union to the protection of the rights of older persons. Maciej, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nicole. Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, I will now share the screen. Can you see it as well?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. Well, first of all, a very warm thank you to the organizers, to Bagzo, for this invitation. I think we all wished to be with you in Hanover. We understand the circumstances. And it's a real pity. I remember I participated a long time ago, more than 10 years, in one of the previous German Senior Citizens Day in Leipzig. I know the scale and the appetite of this kind of gathering, but hopefully it will take place physically next year. So I was asked to look indeed at how European Union can impact the rights of older people, in particular to look at what we call EU acquis. Very briefly, I think it is important to remind this is one of the key concepts in the European Union. So basically, EU acquis communautaire, it covers all different EU treaties, legislations, but also those agreements that the EU takes with its legal identity, but it's also the rulings of the European Court of Justice, all the fundamental rights provisions, horizontal principles such as equality and discrimination. So I think it is important because if we were trying to put it shortly and in one word, in a way, EU acquis is the EU law. So actually, when we look how historically what exists, both soft and hard law, how this has or has not actually improved human rights of older people. So of course, first of all, we've got, and it was already mentioned earlier today, the Treaty of Amsterdam with the introduction of this Article 13 for the first time ever, transversally to address discrimination across all different grounds, including age. But of course, this article was not alone enough, and that's why actually the Commission proposed different initiatives. One of them, it was the treatment, equal treatment in employment and occupation, which also covered age. And I think it is an interesting example because, well, we celebrated last year the 20th anniversary of this employment directive. And although it was a first step indeed to address different kind of discrimination, including on the ground of age in the labor market, in employment, considering also working conditions, 20 years ago, we see clearly that still this is not enough. First of all, we've got the persisting barriers for older workers, such as mandatory retirement age, but also the lack, what I would call broadly, of age-friendly working environments and conditions. And because of this, there is still, I think, a lack both at the national, but also at the European level, and also for the courts, for the legislators to consider age discrimination at the same level as other grounds of discrimination. Here, I will not stop on this. It was mentioned earlier. We've got also different articles of the Charter of Fundamental Rights, which relate to older people, and it's also definitely an added element here to the EU acquis. Also, I could mention some other elements, like, for example, the Accessibility Act, looking at the situation of persons with disabilities, so covering also age-related disability. But now when we are looking from the perspective of all those years and what exists, so this reality check is very, I think unequivocal. First of all, despite those couple of developments, well, those elements which are of interest for older people from the perspective of the promotion of human rights in the EU acquis, actually we still do not have any specific EU strategy, plan, or guidelines which would specifically directly address older people's rights. Because of this, we've got very separate, not coordinated action initiatives. And if when they exist, actually they focus rather on frailty, vulnerability, about needs. So they do not actually approach aging from a positive perspective. They do not introduce this, they don't use the rights-based approach. So this is certainly a missed opportunity. And of course, we've got this current blockage in the Council of the European Union of a draft directive on non-discrimination in access to goods and services. And on top of this, we see clearly that ageism persists. Here, just a reminder of the figures that some of you probably know. Eurobarometer 2019, age discrimination alongside with gender discrimination is the most frequently experienced form of discrimination in the EU. Over 40% of persons actually believe that age discrimination is widespread in their countries. So now let's move from the facts now to what we can do. So when we think about the prospects to promote, to move with the to defend the rights of older people, of course, we've got a couple of let's say windows of opportunities. Let's call them like this. First of all, we've got this European Pillar of Social Rights. It's an attempt to propose a comprehensive social agenda at the European level. There are several articles of the Pillar of Social Rights referring to older persons. Certainly, for the first time ever, Article 18 on the right to long-term care. So, I mean, there is a recognition, it's a step forward. Then we've got the recent consultation on the Green Paper on aging. Again, it created an enormous, I think, expectations, also including from us as older people. Because we indeed believe that there is a need for a comprehensive response and set of policy actions at the European level. We've got also a very, I think, powerful commitment by President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, when she said that she commits for this prosperous and social Europe. This depends on all of us, and we need equality for all. So this idea of creating a union of equality is another possibility that could be used to promote further rights of older people. We've got also, beyond the European Union in itself, we've got the Madrid International Plan for Action on Aging, the current review of this plan, which consists actually of implementation regional actions. They are done periodically, but again, let's move in the next slide about the challenges about it. And of course, last but not least, it was already mentioned by many of you today, there is this ongoing discussion on a possible binding international instrument, such a UN convention, that would be indeed a way to catalyze a strong and inclusive interpretation of the rights of older people, similarly to what it was done with the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. But now, looking at the same, as I said, windows opportunities, let's look at the challenges, because actually the way is still far away to achieve this full promotion of the rights of older people. The Pillar of Social Rights here, of course, we need to put pressure on member states. Actually, it's up to our governments to make the Pillar of Social Rights a reality. Otherwise, and by the way, so far as we can see, aging issues are not necessarily among the priorities at the national level. So definitely here, the European Pillar of Social Rights with the implementation strategy must focus on aging and older people. With the follow-up to the consultation on the green paper on aging, it's a big disappointment. The European Commission has announced that there will be no comprehensive follow-up to this consultation, which could be what we call in the EU jargon a white paper, which is a set of policy actions. For the moment, there is just an announcement of a European care strategy, very interesting, although it will cover not only care and support for older people, but also childcare. And again, alone, a European care strategy is not enough to respond to all the issues that were raised during the consultation on the green paper on aging. Then we've got, as I said, the Union of Equality. So far, actually, the actions that the Commission is proposing, they barely address the issue of aging, and at the same time, useless to repeat what was the impact of the COVID, in particular on the rights of older people. Draft directive to promote equality, to ban non-discrimination beyond employment, so also in access to goods and services. We heard this morning examples from Austria about concrete actually cases, how older people are actually banned from equality. Here again, there is a need for pressure on member states to unblock this directive. MIPA International Plan. Here again, I think the main challenge is that this process was not from the beginning conceived as a rights-based policy process. So this is a missing element, but hopefully the upcoming review will address this. And then again, to conclude with the UN Convention on the Rights of Older People, the way is still long, but there is definitely a potential behind it, and we need to mobilize all of us, older people, but all the actors that can actually impact on our governments to take the right decision. So yes, we can move onward with the promotion of the rights. For this, age has developed actually a proposal for an age equality strategy to ensure coherence in the way age is addressed in EU policies, but also to pave the way for a change in the discourse on aging, to emphasize again the human rights, to translate this union of equality that I've just mentioned into practice, and to provide a comprehensive framework which is still missing. And again, as I mentioned, the green paper apparently will not give further follow-up. So a European age equality strategy for us, it is something that is absolutely necessary. So to conclude, I would say that there is a need, of course, the existing EU acquis has some potential, so far not used efficiently, but it is not enough. That's why with this disappointment, but also with this wish to go beyond what has been done so far, we as older people movement, we believe that there is a need now to have further mobilization. That's why we also launched this initiative, Lead with Us. We want actually to our governments to take more explicitly a commitment on the rights of older people at the UN level, and to bring this issue to an end with the Convention on the Rights of Older People. We can also influence this process from the perspective of older persons. So I will stop here. I want just to mark this occasion because, as you know, age is celebrating our 20th anniversary this year. We actually wish to connect with all those who are ready actually to support our vision for a society of all ages based on a human rights approach, based on this principle that older people are equal within our society. So we are actually ready to cooperate beyond civil society to any of the actors that would like to be part of this, let's say, journey towards a society of all ages. Can I just put 1 minute video for this occasion?
I think
Yes.
that should be fine. Just do it.
Perfect. So here we go. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Yes, thank you all. Watching the chat, I don't see a lot of questions. Am I right, Jürgen?
Ja, wir könnten aber ein paar vielleicht ganz kurz zusammenfassen, auch nochmal mit dem Hinweis. Ich gehe da einfach
Maybe we can just quickly summarize the letter was mentioned by Age and Baxo, so please sign that letter. This is for all organizations. It's not only for federations or umbrella organizations. Everybody can participate. And what you just mentioned, the link for the future of Europe. So there are ways to contribute, and Future Europe is a good address for that. So there is a hyperlink that you can click on. Now we are talking about the right-based approach, and it's a difficult issue, and there are still several states that are looking at the ratification of a convention on the rights of older persons. And Mr. Kucharczyk mentioned the green paper, and there's not going to be a white paper. So the question is, if there's not even a white paper, how will we make sure that people will listen to us? And maybe Joanna can talk about that. So what's going to happen in Brussels, and what's going to be the reaction of the national states?
Yeah.
So you want me to respond to that?
Yes,
Yeah.
please, Joanna, respond to that.
Okay, I mean, I think we also have to look at the wider scope on the discussions around the Equal Treatment Directive in the context of the European Union. So what I tried to show in my intervention at the beginning of this panel is currently EU law is, of course, very narrowly delimited to protection on non-discrimination and to enhance equality on certain grounds. So age is one of those areas that, as we know, under EU secondary law is only covered in relation to employment and occupation. So the discussion about what do we do therefore in relation to the green paper, which I also mentioned was less rights focused. It was more about active aging, lifelong learning. It had a certain particular focus. It was a good to have the paper nonetheless. In terms of follow-up, I can't speak on behalf of the Commission, as we're the EU Fundamental Rights Agency, but I think we need to look more broadly, like I said, to the discussions that have been going on for several years now on the Equal Treatment Directive, because that would open up the protection to a whole range of grounds, including age, in all those areas and those examples that were referred to earlier, such as access to goods and services for both older persons and younger persons. And I think part of the discussion is also to say what's going on in parallel discussions for other grounds that do not receive adequate protection also under EU law. So the grounds that are currently covered most extensively is looking race and ethnicity, has the most protection under EU law, followed then by gender. But other grounds such as disability and age, for example, less so. So I think these discussions, we would kind of enhance the promotion of protection on the ground of age by joining forces with other groups also who say, you know, rather than a silo approach, it's the intersectionality and the recognition that different grounds are currently not receiving equal protection under the law. So I think there's strength in numbers because it's other groups also who are speaking to the need to have that coverage, not only in relation to age, but other groups that currently don't receive that level of protection. So I think that's one approach that we could go towards, promoting the Equal Treatment Directive, which currently discussions are stalled amongst the member states about the Equal Treatment Directive. Thank you.
Vielen Dank. Es ist gerade
Thank you very much. Now there's one more question in the chat, and this question is for the age platform. So what are the possibilities, according to age, to convince the EU Commission to protect the rights of older persons? Now, we had three presidencies, and we know that from France, we didn't hear anything. So what are the possibilities to influence the Commission?
Right. Well, first of all, when we speak about how to use the potential of the EU, obviously it goes both to the European Commission, but also to member states, with the support, of course, of the European Parliament, which also plays a role in the debate. And here, I think there is a clear recognition, for example, in the European Parliament, to move on in the protection of older people's rights in the context of what happened during the pandemic. So I think there is a lot of appetite among members of the European Parliament to move, of course, within the remit of what can be done at the European level, but to recognize that actually older people, and it was already said before, indeed, we are the only group which is not covered by any comprehensive strategy which would actually refer to the rights. So this is, I think, a mantra that we as age will be continuously repeating in our discussions, both with the European Commission. Here, of course, there is, and I think it's more than symbolic. For the first time, we've got a dedicated vice president, Dubravka Šuica, in charge of democracy and demography. And that's why, again, it is a disappointment for us that the Green Paper consultation will not be followed by something more comprehensive, something more ambitious as we thought, because a white paper would be this kind of response that we were expecting. But again, I mean, we will then continue to use those elements that the Commission will be proposing, like this announced proposal for a European care strategy. And again, I presented, I know very briefly, this proposal that we have drafted for an age equality strategy. It's a document, of course, it's a fruit of our own internal reflection with our members, but actually it gives a very clear example that we can propose a document, a strategy, which would take all different aspects of aging, of promoting, of taking a rights-based approach to policies on aging in a one comprehensive document. Again, for the moment, there is no appetite from the European Commission to bring such a strategy. This is what we have understood from the earlier discussions, exchanges with the European Commission. But I mean, it's a long process. We know from the history of the European integration that some issues, they take time. They do not happen overnight, but this does not prevent us from pushing for such a age equality strategy. This Commission maybe will not be able to elaborate, to propose such a document. But of course, we will continue this in a long-term perspective, maybe the next European Commission. It's really for us, how to say, without such a comprehensive, detailed document, which finally would give a clear signal from the European Commission that actually aging and older people, they deserve the same interest and recognition in policies. Without such a signal, we will still have, first of all, the lack in the protection of older people. And I think it gives at the end also a negative signal to the member states, because here actions should be coordinated in between all the levels. So again, our campaigning, our advocacy for age equality strategy will continue.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much. Now, I also wanted to ask a question. So, Convention on the Rights of Older Persons. That was my question, but you have already talked about it, and we are running late, so I'm standing between you and your lunch break. So let's take the break now and meet again at 2 p.m. And then we'll be leaving the European level and go global. Thank you very much.